Hey everybody, welcome back to Jägerhorn. Today's episode is kind of special, as you might notice. It's a special Christmas episode that I wanted to do. So in the last part of this video, I'll get into some Christmas decorations and lighting and stuff like that around Jägerhorn, since I figured I wanted to try something like that with one of my maps. Just take the map as it is and just add Christmas decorations to it and then see how it changes its look. Because it's sort of interesting how in Planet Coaster, with the way that you sort of build things, there's always a certain look to a place, whereas in a real theme park, things often kind of change during the seasons depending on how you decorate everything. So I just wanted to try and mess around with that idea a little bit, and figured since Jägerhorn is already an alpine park and has this very wooden rustic style to it, I think it would be the best of my projects to dress up in a bit of a Christmas way. In any case, in the first part of this video, I actually won't be working on that quite yet. What I wanted to do is work on the queue. Specifically, I'll be spending most of my time on these two little roof covers that are going over the first part of the queue, with all of the sort of small cattle pens here. And that's really just about it. Looking back at this episode, I ended up spending a lot of time just making these very simple roofs, because I'm making everything myself and adding all of the tiny little scenery items together to make these roofs look unique and like nothing that's in the game itself. But that basically ended up being a very time-consuming process. But I think there's some interesting takeaways from it. Although generally, I'm really staying in the style of the rest of the build, so this again is going to be in that alpine Swiss chalet sort of style, with mostly woodwork, but quite a bit of detailing added to that as well. And for one, I am finally using some of the new spooky set wooden pillars that we have, which I'm actually really glad that we finally got these, because a lot of the spooky update stuff has a very Victorian feel to it. And the Swiss chalet style in general is from around the 1900s, when it was really popular and when you can find a lot of old traditional buildings from it. So the Victorian style suits it quite a bit, and there's a lot of Victorian elements in it very often. So I'm actually really glad with how versatile the spooky pack update was, in terms of adding all of these little Victorian scenery details that you can pretty much add into any build. The same, to be honest, I think kind of goes for the adventure updates. I know I haven't talked about this that much, but I really love the new pieces in the adventure updates, and it's just another thing where, even though it's strictly for adventure, supposedly there are so many different uses for the objects in there, since there's a lot of more versatile scenery items in there, and everything's recolorable. So I'm really happy with how versatile the DLCs have become in general, and that you can really use them for much more than what they promise. In any case, to catch up with the build a little bit, so we just have these two very simple roof covers that cover the cattle pens here, and I just wanted to get a basic structure in. It's not a complicated roof or anything, just straight, very simple, and then just dress it up with some details. Now this was a little bit inspired, actually very inspired, by the queue of Symbolica in the Efteling, which kind of similarly I think is also for space reasons, because Symbolica has a bit of a space problem in that it is a dark ride in the middle of a park, and if you look at large dark rides in Disney or many other parks, they're usually toward the edge of a park, because you need a lot of space for a dark ride. But in the Efteling, it's the center attraction, so it's right in the castle in the middle of the park. But that means that it ends up using a lot of space for the dark ride itself, and there's not a lot of space left for the queue. So I think Symbolica has this sort of very compact cattle pen queue, simply because there wasn't any room for anything larger. And I have a bit of a similar issue here, since I sort of worked myself up to the edge of the park here, and I already sort of established some borders for the Jägerhorn park, just to force myself to make this very compact, and force myself to weave everything into each other and use the space efficiently, because I wanted this to be that compact in order to feel a bit more realistic. I think especially if you have a ride like this, having it being very spread out wouldn't be as realistic as making maximum use of space. But in the end, I did sort of work myself into a corner with the queue here. So there wasn't really much that I could do except for just place some buildings over here. I'm definitely going to dress it up later with a lot of foliage. The idea is that these buildings are sort of standing in the middle of the forest, and all the trees should definitely spruce this up at some point in the future. Although that said, I'm now starting work on the second building, the second roof, and this is also one of the reasons why it took a lot of time, because I basically made them both nearly from scratch, because even though they're very similar, they have the same look and almost the same dimensions. They're not quite the same because this second one is longer and a little bit narrower, so I had to make most of the things from scratch over here again, just to make sure that everything fits. Even though the roof itself, of course, was copied. But yeah, this second one is pretty important because it actually has a pretty good sightline. I just wanted some sort of path interaction with the view that you have of the coaster over here, since right in front of this roof there's a little valley and the coaster dips underneath a bridge, which gives a pretty nice view from this path. And also in the distance behind that little valley, if you're standing underneath this roof, you'll be able to see the station and the bridge and just the coaster in general. It's kind of hard to explain what it looks like, but I'll end this video with a shot directly from underneath the roof of the queue, so you can kind of get an idea of what Jägerhorn is going to look like when you're standing inside the queue. Because for me, it's one of my favorite, if not my favorite, views of the coaster, because you get all the most important elements of the coaster all in a single view. You've got the bridges in the front, you've got the station building, you've got the church, which is the big weenie on top of the mountain, very much in the distance, right over the station building and the bridges. And you can even see parts of the lift hill and a bunch of tangled mess of tracks. So I think it's one of the best views to have in the park in general, and just a view that I wanted to have for the queue as well. I think I actually showed it for a split second there, though I'm not entirely sure. But yeah, these are basically the buildings, so they're now done, with the little detail touches just being those gables on the side with the woodwork and the wooden carving detailing. And of course a bunch of spires everywhere, because that makes everything look a little bit nicer. I tried using the adventure items for these little spires at first, but they're a little bit too large, and I still think the Christmas baubles have the best texture and the best very narrow pointy shape to them to build these spires out of. So I think I will be sticking to those, especially for this project. But maybe at some point in the future some of the adventure stuff could be used for some larger spires or something like that. I don't know, but for now I'm sticking with the Christmas stuff because it just works really well. And also the cable, because that's like the most narrow object. Anyway, I wanted to talk about ferns a little bit, because you can see me place a couple of ferns over here, and to be honest, the ferns are really one of my favorite additions of the adventure updates, because they're one of these pieces of foliage which, like I kind of said somewhere earlier in the video, it's something which is a lot more versatile than just the theme that it's meant to be for. So even though they're tropical ferns, I think they work out quite well in any kind of climate. And when you've got forests like this in mountains, even in alpine areas in Europe, there are quite a lot of ferns, and it's one of this sort of underbrush foliage type that Planet Coaster didn't have so much. One of the things that I was sort of missing is that everything looks very fancy, but you don't have a lot of foliage that sort of grows randomly, more or less weed. Sometimes you just want to have weeds here and there. And some of the new plants, but also those ferns, work out really well for that sort of stuff, because a lot of the times if you've got some sort of ground in a forest or something like that, there's quite a bit of ferns and other kinds of underbrush like that. And I'm just really happy that we finally have some ferns in the game, and that they manage to work quite well even outside of a tropical setting. So the textures, just the fact that they've been added at all, is just one of the things that I'm most happy with in the adventure updates. And you'll probably at some point see me go back in a lot of my projects and just add ferns everywhere and similar types of plants, because it's just a little bit of variety that I've been missing kind of so far. Anyway, onto the last building thing of this episode, which is going to be the final part of the queue. The one thing of the queue which I didn't finish yet is the sort of zigzag little path where there's just gonna be foliage around it, but there are no roofs or anything. And I guess I might get to that in the next episode, but it's not going to be quite as difficult to do or quite as time consuming. And I thought for this episode, I just wanted to focus on finishing the building aspects and also finishing the exterior of the station building. Because even though the station building itself is already quite finished, there's this part of the queue which sticks out like a sore thumb when it was unfinished, so I just really wanted to add some railings here, add some walls here, and make it all look clean and nice. So that's what we're getting to here. Also, what's really handy that we now have is the barriers that we can stop people with, which I'm going to be using in a second, not quite yet, but it's something that I was secretly hoping for, because as you might notice, I've got 2 supports right in the middle of the path, which surely people would walk straight through. But I'm hoping by placing these barriers over here, yep, there we go, that for one, I can stop people from walking into the pillars, but also you can kind of use them to barrier off some parts of the queue and use those to play some scenery, because in real life, very often in queues, especially my favorite queues, you'll have some random little scenery elements like this everywhere, some pottery, some barrels, some chests, crates, all that sort of stuff. And it's kind of hard to add this directly into the queue in Planet Coaster because people will walk through it if you place it on the path. But I think with just a few of those barriers, which even still, that's nothing unheard of. Sometimes you'll have some ropes or something around scenery elements in theme parks. And I think with those barriers, at least we should be able to stop people from walking straight into them. I have to be very honest though, I didn't test it yet, so I'm actually kind of banking on the fact that this is going to work, but it should, I think. So, one of the very last things is adding a bunch of foliage around here. I was very careful with what kind of trees I wanted, because I wanted some trees in front of the station, but I wanted some selected parts of the station to still be visible, so it was a bit of a puzzle of what kind of tree would work out best in what position to keep most of the station view intact. In any case, we're moving on to the Christmas part of this video, because that was more or less it for the queue. So now I placed a Christmas tree after a long time of trying to figure out where I could even place a Christmas tree. I didn't even place it on the path because there's no like good square at the moment to place it on that's like completely finished. So I decided to add it in the sort of center point right in front of the station, right between the coaster tracks, which doesn't quite make it a traditional sort of Christmas tree, but I think in the context it works out quite well. Especially, I guess, with the presents underneath it, kind of signaling that this is the big Christmas tree, even though it's not on the path. But yeah, I figured that was just my best shot here. And for the rest of this, I wanted to try and lay down all of these lights alongside the building, mostly just following the roof lines of the station and also some of the other buildings, but also doing some other Christmas lights, you know, just crank up that electricity bill here and put up some lights alongside the windows as well and some of the pillars. Just in general, I was looking to place them in such a way that the general contours of the buildings would be most recognizable, so that even if everything else falls away and it's completely pitch black and you can only see the lights, that you can still tell by the shape of the lights that this is the station or that another building is the church on top of the mountain. So that was basically sort of my idea here. To be honest, I'm kind of out of my field of expertise here because I don't know anything about placing Christmas lights. This is just what I judged from pictures and such would be the best way to go forward with this. And hell, it's just Christmas lights. What am I talking about? This is no rocket science. We're just placing lights everywhere where it kind of looked cool. I shouldn't try to be pretentious and make myself sound better than I do. I just kind of put up some music and was like, let's play some Christmas lights everywhere. So this is one of my favorite parts actually, because the church looks pretty cool with Christmas lights. I'm not sure how acceptable it is that I'm putting all of these lines of lights everywhere, or just the fact that I'm building a church building in general in a theme park. But I think it works out quite well. It works out too well not to do it, so it looks very cozy and very Christmassy. And again, I sort of followed the general outline of the most important parts of the building to make sure that it would be recognizable that this is the church building and its spire, as well as the battlements over here. I'm not sure if anybody has ever placed Christmas lights over that sort of stuff, but no, the buttresses, there we go. Not sure if anybody actually placed any Christmas lights ever on buttresses, but it looks pretty cool actually. Oh yeah, and the bridge as well, since that's a pretty major part of this build as well. Now that the lights were done, I wanted to put some of these little Christmas... Actually, I'm not sure what you would call these, but I figured... I actually got this idea when I was in Disney Sea, because Disney Sea actually did this as well with a few buildings, and most notably the Scrooge McDuck sort of gift shop, which is just in general a really cool building, has a lot of these on it, and I completely don't know the English word, but in any case, these little Christmas hedge looking things, kind of like mistletoes, except they're not round. Although I also put up a few mistletoes. There's even one in the shape of a star, which is pretty cool. And finally, there's just a little bit of lighting, because I'm going to be taking night shots, but so far I haven't actually done anything in night in Jägerhorn, so I had to sort of touch up the lighting a little bit. This is also just going to be temporary, because it's not really that great lighting. I just try to light it up well for the pictures and videos that I wanted to take. But yeah, thank you guys for watching, and I hope to see you guys next time in Jägerhorn, and Merry Christmas everybody!